Eddy followed Artie through the dark forest. He was flying past the trees so fast that Eddy needed to jog in order to catch up with him. "Where are we going?" he asked. "We're going to the edge of the nightmare. Once we get out of here, you'll be safe." That was when a thought occurred to Eddy. "Hey Artie, if this is all just a dream and it's not real, why don't I just wake up from it?" "Because you can't. The nightmare won't let you." "What do you mean?" Artie fluttered backward until he was flying next to Eddy. "It's a little complicated, but I'll try to explain it anyway. This body here..." As I spoke, he stretched out his feathers like he was showing something in a presentation. "This isn't your real body. It's a mental projection of yourself inside of your own mind." Eddy looked down at his body as he continued to jog through the forest. "I think I get it," he said. Artie continued with the explanation. "And normally when you wake up, you return to the real world and the projection disappears. But since we're in a nightmare, the connection between your real self and your mind has been cut. So the only way to restore the connection is to get you out of the nightmare." Eddy was barely keeping up with all of this, but he was starting to see the big picture. "So, what happens if I die while in my own mind?" "That's actually the funny thing. You can't die while in your own mind." "Oh, okay. But you can still feel pain like a normal person. So if the demon gets you, it's going to do horrible, unspeakable things to you." Eddy gulped down air. He didn't dare imagine what plans the demon had in store if it caught him. "Relax," said Artie as he flew ahead. "We'll get you out of here." After a short moment, Artie stopped. "Ah, here it is." Eddy slowed down, almost walking right into the wall of the nightmare. It almost looked like a continuation of the forest behind a wall of glass, like a mirror that didn't cast your reflection. He put his hand on it and felt something soft, yet weirdly unbreakable at the same time. Small ripples traveled across the surface of the wall, like a pond of water after a stone had been dropped into it. "This is it?" he asked Artie. "Oh yeah," said Artie as he landed on the ground. This nightmare wasn't as big as I thought it was gonna be. Anyway, time to get out of here. Put the mask on." Eddy did as he was told. He put the mask on and once again felt its magic flow through his body. "Okay, now what do I do?" "Just pull it open. The magic will do the rest." "From where?" he asked, confused. "Anywhere. Just dig your fingers into it." Eddy put his fingers through the invisible wall. He felt them worm their way into it, creating a gap that he could pull apart. But then, when he actually tried, the gap wouldn't open any further. "What's wrong?" "It won't open," said Eddy, frustrated. He tried pulling on it some more, but the gap wouldn't budge no matter how hard he tried. He suddenly felt the gap close up, forcing him to pull his hands out. Eddy sighed in dismay. "So now what?" "This is something that Spectre thought might happen." "He did? What do you mean?" "He said that if you had trouble using magic to get out of the nightmare, I was to relay these instructions to you." Artie cleared his throat and said, "Having magic gives you a small ounce of control over a nightmare and can even allow you to bend the rules to a certain extent. To open up a gap in the walls of a nightmare, you need to channel the magic in your body into your arms and hands." "But how do I do that?" "All you need to do is just concentrate. Think about doing it and the magic will do the rest." Eddy looked back at the wall again. He could still feel the magic flowing through his body, but he wondered if he really could control it. He put his fingers into it again, recreating the gap, concentrated his magic, and slowly pulled the wall apart. Suddenly, he felt it. The flow of magic shifted into his arms and hands at will. He began to pull the gap apart. Artie watched as it became bigger and bigger until it was just enough for Eddy to slip through it. Artie flew above Eddy's head and through the gap. As soon as he stepped out, he turned around just in time to see the gap close itself up. And then Eddy looked up at the nightmare in horror. The outside dome was a pitch black wall. Somehow seeing it from the outside unnerved him just as much as it did being on the inside of it. "This is what the outside of the nightmare looks like?" he asked Artie. The owl landed next to Eddy and said, "I know, terrible, isn't it? By the way, what's up with your body?" Eddy looked down at his hands to see magic flowing through them, but there was something different. It seemed thicker and brighter than normal. He grunted in pain. His body started feeling uncomfortably hot, like a fire had been lit in his stomach. He felt like he was going to be sick. He quickly tore the mask off, and it immediately stopped. What was that? I think that may have been magic overload. Magic overload? Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I didn't recognize it at first because I haven't seen it in ages. Arya looked down at the mask and then back to Eddy again. "Maybe we should move on," he suggested. "Yeah, I think you're right." Eddy turned around only to be met with another strange sight. He'd seen it from the inside of the nightmare, but actually looking at it in full view was another story entirely. He was suddenly in what looked like a village. "What the heck?" he said in disbelief. "This is the inside of your mind?" asked I, just as confused as Eddy was. But then both of them looked up at the sign next to the entrance of the village. It said, "Welcome to Mysteryville." "Oh, you really do love mystery, don't you?" said Artie. Eddy was facing away from Artie, groaning. "What's wrong now?" Eddy didn't say anything. Artie looked back at the village and then back at Eddy again. He realized he was actually embarrassed by all of this. "Eddy, it's fine. I've traveled to millions, if not billions, of dream worlds in my life, and I've seen plenty of weird stuff like this. Nothing to be embarrassed about." "Oh, really?" Really. Now come on, let's find a place to get out of the nightmare." "Yeah, I think you're right." Eddy began walking through the village with Artie riding on his shoulder. As they walked, the place became more and more surrealistic. The townsfolk looked like normal people, and some of them were even standing in front of the nightmare, though they looked afraid of it. Others looked like they were going about their daily business, though they were taking nervous glances at the nightmare. The streets, bizarrely enough, were all completely different landscapes. The entrance of the village was a countryside town, but there was also a street that looked like the inside of a mansion simply called Mansion Street, followed up by another one that went down a black and white alley called Noir Alley Avenue. Out of curiosity, he put his arm into Noir Alley Avenue and, sure enough, it turned black and white. Out of fright, he quickly pulled his arm back and continued walking. "You're okay, Eddy?" I asked. Eddy answered as honestly as he could. "Not really. This place is weirding me out." You'll get used to it. Eventually. Eddy hoped that would come sooner rather than later. As he continued walking, he heard someone shouting behind him. It sounded like a woman yelling, "Stop, thief!" and "He stole my necklace!" He turned around to see a man dressed in black running away from the woman. Black shirt, black pants, and even a black mask tied over his eyes. He was dressed up like a stereotypical burglar, like our kids do when playing cops and robbers. And in his hand was the jeweled necklace he'd just stolen. He ran right past Eddy. But as soon as Eddy turned around to look at him fleeing, a figure suddenly dropped down from seemingly out of nowhere and stood in front of the thief. The thief stopped right in his tracks. The man who stood before him was covered in a flashy orange cloak with a hood, but the weirdest part was that his face was completely covered in darkness. Not a single inch of it could be seen. In a flash, the orange-cloaked man attacked the thief. He was so fast that his arms looked like a blur. Eddy couldn't tell if he'd punched the thief 4 or 6 times. The thief collapsed, utterly defeated. The woman ran onto the scene just as the cloaked man was picking the necklace up. "Oh, thank you, sir, thank you," she said as the cloaked man handed the necklace to her. Just as the cloaked man returned the stolen goods, he saw Eddy watching the event. He walked over to him. Even though Eddy couldn't see his face, he could tell the man was intensely observing him. Do you need something?" Eddy said nervously. The cloaked man didn't answer. Instead, he jumped up, landed on one of the buildings, and disappeared behind it. "What the heck?" said Eddy, completely confused. He turned to the woman and tried asking her about him. Excuse me?" The woman turned to Eddy. "Can you tell me, who that was? Can you please tell me, The woman shook her head in confusion and said, "Excuse me? I actually can't tell what you're saying." "Can you please tell us who that was?" Artie finished for Eddy. "Oh, that was our local defender, Mystery Man." "That's his name? Seriously?" said Artie, completely unimpressed. "Oh yeah, nobody knows who he is, but he's always here to help out." "Well, thank you," said Artie. Eddy let out a light, disappointed-sounding groan. What's wrong?" "I still have trouble talking to people, even in my own mind." I looked around and saw a cafe across the street. "Hey, let's go in there," he said with a point of his feather. "After everything, I think we could both do with a rest." "Maybe you're right." Eddy began walking over to the cafe. He entered and they both took a table next to the window. The cafe itself was actually a nice, cozy little place. Being in it instantly made Eddy feel more relaxed. As soon as he sat down, he breathed a sigh of relief. Artie landed on the other side of the table. He looked out the window and said, "Nice place." But Eddy was still a little bewildered. This is the inside of my mind? "Eddy, it's okay. You like reading mystery novels and you have a part of your mind dedicated to that love. I've seen weirder. Nothing to be embarrassed about." Eddy took another look at the cafe. It looked like the inside of an inn, much like in some of the mystery novels Eddy read. He'd actually never told anybody about his hobby except for Artie. "I don't think I've even asked yet. Why do you like reading mystery novels?" he asked out of the blue. At first Eddy didn't know how to answer, but he tried anyway. "I guess I enjoy the suspense. The feeling of not knowing what's going on, but feeling compelled to figure it out. It's like trying to solve a puzzle." Artie raised his eyebrow. "A puzzle, you say?" "Yeah, when you're reading a good mystery, you're following a set of clues to solve the case. You don't know what's going on, but you want to know. You have to know. And then there's that satisfying moment at the end where all the clues come together and the mystery is revealed with something you don't expect." "Eddy?" What?" "You're actually smiling." "Yeah, why?" "You almost never smile." "What? Yes, I do." "Not really. Most of the time you just look mopey." Eddy locked up as he started thinking if that was true or not. "Regardless, it's fine. As I said before, it's nothing to be embarrassed about." "May I take your order?" said the cafe waitress as she walked up to the table. "Yes, I'll have..." Eddy trailed off as he looked up to see Sophia, his school crush, dressed up as a waitress. Artie snickered. "That, on the other hand, is something to be embarrassed about." He turned to the waitress and said, "Yeah, I'll have some fish chips if you've got them." "Of course. And you?" she said to a very embarrassed Eddy who was turning his head away with his hands over his face in shame. "Just water," he croaked. "Okay, coming right up," said the waitress before leaving. Eddy rose his head back up. Artie was still chuckling. Could you please stop? I can't help it. The horniness of humanity is a running joke that never gets old. Neither him or Artie said anything more as they waited to be served. Though Artie, as much as he tried, couldn't stop snickering. Here you go. The waitress brought a bowl of fish chips back to the table along with a glass of water. Thank you. Artie immediately started munching down on the chips. Eddy took the glass of water, sipped it, and realized that it was ice cold, just the way he liked it. In fact, it tasted perfectly refreshingly cold. Wow, this is really good water, he said. Well, yeah, it's your mind. You're the boss here. What do you mean? I mean exactly that. It's your mind. Eddy suddenly got it. If this was his mind, he could do anything. He raised his hand, thought something up, and a single fish chip appeared. Huh? What's wrong? I was trying to create another bowl of chips, but nothing happened. Artie put his feather to his beak. Why don't you try again? Try to think bigger. Eddy raised his hand again and concentrated on the fish chip. He did what Artie said and tried thinking big. The fish chip shook a little, and then, with a popping sound, it was suddenly standing upright, had become tall, and there were branches on top of it. Eddy had somehow transformed the fish chip into a fish chip tree. How did I do that? I don't know, but I like it, said Artie as he took a chip out of the tree. Eddy decided to take a chip from the tree for himself. Much like the water, the chip tasted really good for him. In fact, he found himself taking more. As he ate, he stared out of the window again. I wonder who that guy was. You mean the guy in the orange cloak? That's right. And why was he dressed like Ghost Sleuth? Artie raised one of his eyebrows. Ghost Sleuth? You mean that book series you like reading? That's right. The outfit he wore kind of looked like the one the main character wears in those books. But for some reason it was orange instead of white. Artie thought about it, remembered the cover of the books, and realized that was the outfit he wore. There was also something else on Eddy's mind. He couldn't explain it, but he felt this connection to the cloaked individual. But he couldn't place his finger on why. Suddenly, a rumble shook the entire cafe. One of the visitors watched as his coffee rippled in his cup. A second rumble shook the cafe again. Eddy felt the vibration go through his feet. What was that? Eddy said nervously. Both him and Artie looked out of the window one last time. There were people running away from something. Artie took flight and flew out of the cafe with Eddy following him outside. What's going on? Eddy trailed off when he saw the cause of the rumbling. A big hole had been dug out in the middle of the street. A long arm with pitch-black skin emerged up from it and slammed its claw down onto the ground with a crash. Dread and fear gripped Eddy. The demon had followed them out of the nightmare and into the dream world. The creature dragged its claws on the ground so loudly Eddy had to cover his ears from how grating it was. Suddenly someone grabbed his arm. It was the orange-cloaked man. Come with me, he ordered. The orange-cloaked man dragged Eddy away from the scene by his arm. Where are we going? The cloaked man said nothing. Where are we going? He asked again, this time being more demanding. I think we should just trust him, said Artie as he flew next to them. Eddy still felt unsure, but knew that following the man was better than facing what was coming after them. The orange-cloaked man took Eddy down an alleyway that looked like the inside of a mansion hallway. He stopped at a bookshelf and pushed the side of it, opening up a secret passageway in the wall. Classic, said Artie as he flew in. Eddy and the orange-cloaked man followed him. Come with me, down here, he demanded. He led Eddie down a short flight of stairs and through a narrow secret passageway. There's a secret passageway at the back of an alley? Eddie asked as he followed the man. There are secret passageways all over Mysteryville. Heck, they're not even really secrets anymore. Who are you? Eddie tried asking. The orange-cloaked man stopped, turned to Eddie and said, I can't say that right now. Just trust me. But then, suddenly, they heard a thumping sound from up above. Eddie looked up as he heard the stomping grow louder and louder. Let's move, the cloaked man whispered. But before they could do anything, something suddenly punched its way through the ceiling of the secret passageway. Eddie had to shield himself from the falling debris. A long black tail shot down from the gap, wrapped itself around Eddie's legs, and pulled him up off the ground back through the hole. Eddie lost his grip on the mask and fell to the ground. Eddie! He scooped up the mask with his talons and flew up the hole. Outside, Eddie had been dragged out into a forest area. He was suspended in midair by the black tail of the demon. He tried fighting it, but the tail wrapped itself around his body. His right arm was pinned to his side while his left arm was still free. The creature dangled Eddie upside down in front of its face, finally giving him a full view of how grotesque it truly was. It looked like an animal with 4 legs, but its body was colored in an inky pitch-black darkness. It was like staring into the void. But the most striking part to Eddie was its head. It had a long dog-like face with a set of sharp teeth covering the outside of its mouth. Its eyes were lean and glowing with pale light, and its expression looked like it was frozen permanently in anger and hatred. You've put me through a lot, you little cretin. It spoke in a deep, monstrous voice. Eddie was too afraid to even try struggling anymore. How could something this horrifying exist? Now let's go back to the nightmare, so I can finish my job on you. Let him go, shouted the voice of the Spectre. Both Eddie and the demon turned to see Spectre standing on top of one of the forest trees. Are you sure about that? Said the demon as it held Eddie up. Sharp, sword-like claws emerged from the tail just underneath Eddie's feet. There were about 8 or 10 of them, and they arced over his body, forming a cone-shaped prison. It was like being in the middle of a giant mincing machine. I can't kill him, but you do know what happens to the mind when it's in extreme pain, don't you? You wouldn't want that to happen to someone so young. The blades inched closer to Eddie, closing him in the prison even more. Archie had flown out of the hole but was hiding in the bushes of a tree. He was still clutching the mask in one of his talons. He was too afraid to do anything lest the demon shred him to pieces. Give it to me. Archie looked up to see the orange-cloaked man. He had his arm out, offering to take the mask. Archie, seeing no better option than to trust the man, handed the mask over to him. He took it and then jumped up through the air over towards the demon. He silently glided through the air and landed on top of the bladed cage. He stood on the flat end of one of the blades with perfect balance. Young man, catch. He whispered as he dropped the mask through the small gap at the top of the prison. Eddie caught it with his free arm. It's up to you now, said the cloaked man before jumping away. Eddie held the mask in front of himself and looked back at Spectre. He could tell that he was frustrated by the situation. And the worst part is that Eddie felt like it was his fault. He wished more than anything to help. He thought about putting the mask on, but he was hesitant. He didn't know what he would do with it. Even if he could use it to escape, he was worried he might get in Spectre's way. But then, at that moment, something rose up inside of him. At first he didn't know what it was, but he didn't ignore it. He let the feeling sink in and understood what it was saying. It was a desire to help, a drive to do something, a need to survive. And the only way to accomplish these things was to put the mask on. He placed it over his face. He felt the magic flow through his body once again, but this time something different happened. There was an explosion of white lights that blew the prisoner away into pieces. The demon screamed in pain from having its tail singed off. "What?" the demon shouted. The creature looked up to see a whirlwind of bright white magic enveloping Eddy's body. Eddy felt power flowing through him. It surged like a strong current of water, but it didn't feel overwhelming. It was like Eddy was welcoming it into his body. The light disappeared. Eddy was dressed up exactly like the Spectre. Same clothes, same grey cloak and hood, but with his own mask. "What is this?" the demon growled in frustration. Eddy could feel it. A warm, glowing light inside of him. "Eddy, get over here!" Spectre called out to him. Eddy looked over to see Spectre still standing on top of the tree. But before he could move, he sensed the demon still below him. It lunged up from the ground, taking a swipe at him. But Eddy disappeared in the blink of an eye just before its razor-sharp blades made contact. "What?" the demon yelled. Eddy reappeared on the tree next to Spectre. He perched himself on the top branch, standing next to him. "Whoa," he gasped, feeling the rush. He looked down at himself to see the costume he was wearing, along with the gloves and boots he suddenly had on. "What was that?" he asked, confused. "I'll explain later," said Spectre as the demon charged at both of them. It used its razor-like claws to slice down the tree they were both standing on. Eddy and Spectre quickly flew off the tree before it fell down. Eddy watched as the tail of the demon grew back. It pointed it at both of them as it began firing sharp, bony spikes. The hail of spikes soared towards them like missiles. Spectre put his arms up. A giant glowing blue sheet of metal appeared before them. Eddy heard most of the spikes loudly bounce off it from the other side. Some of them barely punctured through the metal, stopping partway through the wall itself. The demon jumped off the ground and lunged up to attack them. It latched onto the metal wall in an attempt to climb over it. For a brief second, Spectre wasn't so sure what to do. He felt under pressure from the demon's relentless onslaught. But then, as if on instinct, Eddy put his arms in front of him and blew the metal wall with the demon on it away. The demon let go of the wall, fell to the ground, and crashed through several trees. Eddy looked down at his hands. He couldn't believe he'd just done that. "Nice call," said Spectre. "How did I do that?" Suddenly, the two of them heard the beast roaring at them again. It had gotten back up almost immediately. "I'll explain later. Can you do anything else?" the Spectre urgently said. The demon immediately began charging at them again. It was like an attack dog told to kill by its master. Eddy rose his arms up, making a wall of metal spring out of the ground, separating them and the demon. But then, from the other side, the demon started slamming its shoulder up against the wall, trying to break through it. Outward dents started appearing on Eddy and Spectre's side, accompanied by unpleasantly loud banging sounds. "How do we stop it?" Eddy yelled over the noise. "Can you create a weapon?" "I think so. What kind?" "Any kind." Eddy created the first weapon that came to his head, a small Colt detective's gun, and handed it to Spectre. "Is this good?" "It's perfect. It just needs some ammo." Spectre waved his hand out, and bright, aggressive red bullets appeared in mid-air. Eddy watched as Spectre flipped the barrel of the gun out and made the red bullets float into the sockets before snapping it shut. "Now we just need to wait," said Spectre as he aimed the gun. He waited for the demon to break through the wall. The outward dents grew bigger and bigger. Eddy floated back a little behind him, worried that he might get in the way. Finally, the sheet of metal broke, and the demon ripped a hole open with its claws. It popped its head out of the hole and stopped just in front of Spectre with the gun raised right up to its face. Back to the shadows. Spectre pulled the trigger. There was a loud bang, a bright flash of red light. Eddy could have sworn he saw the bullet pass through the demon's head. It felt like it was happening in slow motion. He watched as the demon's head sprang back through the hole like it had been kicked by a boot. Spectre fired off more bullets, piercing its body and pushing it back even further. And there it finally fell to the ground dead. In the corner of Mysteryville, the nightmare it had created finally started to disappear. Eddy used his powers to make the wall disappear, giving him and Spectre a good look at the demon's body. Both of them floated down to the ground as they watched the demon disintegrate. As soon as Eddy landed, he took his mask off. It actually felt hard to believe this was happening, but the evidence was right there. Him and Mr. Gardner had actually defeated this creature. "We actually did it," he said, feeling a little shell-shocked. "That's right. Thanks for your help, by the way," said Spectre. You're welcome." Artie flew in and landed on Eddy's shoulder. "Oh, thank goodness both of you are alright. Sorry I couldn't help." "It's fine," said Eddy, forgiving Artie. He looked at his hand and said, "How did I do that?" "Isn't it obvious? It's your mind," said Spectre. "My mind?" "We are in it, remember? Here you have unlimited control of magic." Eddy looked down at the mask again. The whole time he'd been using the magic, he felt like he was completely in control. It had done exactly what he had told it to, almost like it was an extension of his own body. But more importantly, he felt like he'd helped, even if he wasn't entirely sure what he was doing. He turned back to Spectre and asked him, "Is this what it's like using magic?" "Oh yeah," Spectre confidently nodded. "And with some training, I think you'll make a great maid." "Ahem," Artie interrupted. "Oh, sorry, that is, if you're interested." Eddy looked back at the corpse of the dissolving demon and thought about it. If he could do this inside of his own mind, then what else was he capable of? Maybe the mask had chosen him for a reason. He turned back to Spectre one last time and said, "Yes, I want to learn magic. Please teach me." He finished his sentence as the body of the demon finally disappeared. Spectre smiled from underneath his mask and nodded. And then he looked up and said, "Who's that?" Eddy turned around to see the orange-cloaked man standing behind the trees. "He was the one who slipped you the mask." "I don't know who he is." In a flash, the orange-cloaked man leapt away and disappeared back into the shadows. "Yeah, maybe you'll find out eventually," said Spectre before turning around. "Now then, I better get going." "You're not gonna stay here?" said Artie. "I prefer not to stay in places any longer than I have to. Besides, I think Eddy could use some time to himself after everything. See you tomorrow." The Spectre floated off the ground and rose up into the sky. Eddy watched him fly up until he disappeared. Later, Eddy had created a high hill to sit on that overlooked Mysteryville. He was waiting for himself to wake up in the real world and was taking the time to reflect on everything that had just happened. "Hey, you alright, Eddy?" Artie asked him. "I'm fine. I'm just a little bit nervous." He took a deep breath in and out. "Do you think I can do it?" he asked Artie. "Course you can. I'll be with you every step of the way." "You're actually going to join me?" "It's just a hunch, but somehow I get the feeling this involves all of us. And besides, you're going to need all the help you can get." "Thank you," said Eddy, smiling. He stood up as he watched the sun rising up over Mysteryville. He didn't know what his future held, but somehow he knew he'd made the right choice. And for the first time in his life, he felt optimistic. The sun rose, Eddy felt its warmth wash over his face, and he woke back up in the real world. Eddy opened his eyes. He saw the mask placed on his bedside table. Despite everything that had just happened, he felt like he'd had a good night's sleep. He actually felt refreshed. He got out of bed, didn't see Artie anywhere, but continued with his daily routine. He went to the kitchen, got out his usual cereal box, and poured himself a bowl. As he ate, he began thinking about the events of last night. A part of him still couldn't believe he'd helped defeat a demon, and that he'd accepted to become a mage. He had butterflies in his stomach, but he didn't want to back down either. And besides, he had Artie to help him. In fact, he was wondering where Artie was. As he was thinking that, Artie suddenly flew out of Dad's bedroom and landed in front of Eddy on the table. "Eddy, we've got a problem," he said urgently. "What? What is it?" "It's your father. He's missing." A pang of fear spread through Eddy's heart. He dropped his spoon, fled to his father's bedroom, and pushed the door open. To his dismay, Artie's dreadful words were true. Eddy's father was gone. The bed was left unmade with an open sheet, and there was no sign of him at all.